All right, boys and girls, welcome back to another edition of the Big Ben Show. You can email us, as always, at bigben@fox.com. Follow us wherever you find your podcasts. I hope that you will rate, review, subscribe, share it with your friends. Today, I want to talk to you about this momentous week where Donald Trump made the decision to pull the trigger on the Iranian nuclear program in a way that many of us never expected would actually happen. Of course, the follow-on to that was back and forth between Israel, Iran, and programs that have been at odds when it comes to the Middle East for decades, going back in terms of their opposition for years and years in ways that really the president hoped to resolve. Unfortunately, from his perspective, this is something that led into a situation that he didn't anticipate and one that, frankly, left him frustrated. Cut one.
I'm not happy that Israel's going out now. There was one rocket that I guess was fired overboard. It was after the time limit, and it missed its target. And now Israel's going out. These guys got to calm down. It's ridiculous. I didn't like plenty of things I saw yesterday. I didn't like the fact that Israel unloaded right after we made the deal. They didn't have to unload. And I didn't like the fact that the retaliation was very strong. But in all fairness, Israel unloaded a lot. And now I hear Israel just went out because they felt it was violated by one rocket that didn't land anywhere. That's not what we want, I'll tell you. And I'm telling you, I'm not happy about that, Israel, either.
This is Donald Trump sounding a lot like the way that I talk when my 4-year-old and 2-year-old are fighting with each other. Cut 4.
We basically have two countries that have been fighting so long and so hard that they don't know what the they're doing. Do you understand that?
That being said, what Donald Trump achieved in the last week is something of enormous import. The decision that he made to pull the trigger at a moment when everything had been cleared, the skies were cleared, and Israel allowed for the type of avenue toward something that America has had as a policy priority for decades under bipartisan administrations, that Iran should not be allowed to have a nuclear weapon, is something that's frankly shocking. It resets the Middle East in a way that I think that we won't really fully appreciate for years to come. It's something that I think is long overdue, and it's also a credit to the president that he was willing to depart from a faction of his base when it came to their advice about how dangerous it would be to go after the Iranian nuclear program in ways that really cut against a lot of the people who have for many years maintained that they are the true representatives of America first. In reality, what we've learned is that the president is the leader of America first, that he defines it, that he prioritizes the right things when it comes to American interests, and that he's not going to be pulled one way or the other by people who he believes are working at odds with those interests when it comes to an opportunity to set America's enemies back in a significant way. Cut 6.
I think this is a new opportunity to actually pursue the path of peace. As I said yesterday, what the Iranians have showed through their support of terror networks, through their now failed effort to build a nuclear weapon, is that they're just not very good at war. And I think the president really hit the reset button and said, look, let's actually produce long-term peace for the region. That's always been his goal. I actually think when we look back, we will say the 12-day war was an important reset moment for the entire region.
J.D. Vance is right when he does this analysis, and it's something that I think it comes from the heart from him. He's not someone who has been, resolved on one side of this neocon versus isolationist argument, and I think he's been going along with what the president's priorities are, while also advising him in many ways to slow his roll, to take his time, to be patient when it comes to these different things. The president has made his decision. He's pulled the trigger in this in a way that I think is laudable and is smart and is going to put America on the right path when it comes to the Middle East going forward. But it's also not something that comes without risk. And obviously, there is the constant question of whether regime change is something that is going to be the result of this in a way that pulls America in potentially to a much more difficult fight. Cut 9.
That's up to the Israelis, but our view has been very clear that we don't want a regime change. We do not want to protract this or build this out any more than it's already been built out. We want to end their nuclear program, and then we want to talk to the Iranians about a long-term settlement here. We believe very strongly that there are two pathways. There's a pathway where Iran continues to fund terrorism, continues to try to build a nuclear program, attacks American troops. That's the bad pathway for Iran, and it will be met with overwhelming force.
I think that when you saw the three of those gentlemen, J.D. Vance, Pete Hegseth, and Marco Rubio, standing behind President Trump when he made the announcement about what had been achieved in terms of this phenomenal mission, an incredible one, really, when you look at the logistics of it, I think you were seeing the three guys who are going to be contending for the Republican nomination for president in the coming years. I truly believe that. And it's because they are people who I think understand the MAGA movement. They understand America first. They understand the priorities of this president, and they understand the demands of a world in which the American people have to operate facing challenges that are very real, especially when it comes to decaying regimes like the Iranians that could easily have achieved this type of weaponry and then had everything fall apart in ways that could create chaos in the region and could be against the interests of both America and our allies around there. I do think, though, that we are going to be facing, in addition to the challenges of the future, a challenge in the form of a Democratic Party that has completely lost its way, not just on the point of Israel and the Middle East, not just on the point of foreign policy, as we've been discussing, but also, I think, losing their way when it comes to America and the promise that they believe exists within backwards leftist sentiments animated by socialists like their current nominee for the Democratic Party in New York City. Cut 11.
My friends, we have done it. I will be your Democratic nominee for the mayor of New York City.
That's Zohran Mamdani accepting the nomination after a victory over Andrew Cuomo. Cut 12.
Tonight was Assemblyman Mamdani's night, and he touched young people and got them to come out. I called him. I congratulated him. Let's give him a round of applause.
Mamdani is essentially a distillation of every bad idea that the Democratic Party has. Every bad idea related to Marxism, to socialism, to government-run supermarkets, to a ridiculous idea about taxing the hell out of rich Americans and people who actually, have produced so much greatness for New York City in the past in order to pay for ridiculous ideas. Concepts that are completely at odds with what Americans actually want in their daily lives. The Chicago Tribune even took the step of warning the people of New York City against the idea of nominating someone like Mamdani because of their experience with their own harsh leftist mayor, who is one of the most unpopular politicians in the entire country. And yet, New York decided to nominate this person who can't even be trusted to have the same accent depending on who he's talking to. Cut 14.
Socialism.
This is Zohran Mamdani. Here's what he normally sounds like.
We gather tonight in the wealthiest city, in the wealthiest country, in the history of the world.
But in an interview in South Africa, he sounded a little different.
I actually created a playlist for Mira, who also happens to be my mother. Nepotism and hard work goes a long way.
And in an interview with the Turkish-American podcast, Mamdani sounded different again.
I'll be honest with you, Brother Masoom, is that at this point, not many people are thinking about it.
And here is Zohran during his rapper days.
It would have been here earlier, but worldwide tour is a worldwide tour is a worldwide tour. As in you can't
celebrity
just
things.
You can't just stop it.
I don't care what accent you put on it. This is a guy who, the day after October 7th, went after Benjamin Netanyahu as being the real problem in the Middle East. He is perhaps the most anti-Semitic major city nominee that we have seen in the history of the United States of America, and he comes from a city that has the largest Jewish population in America. This is unacceptable. It's not the kind of thing a major party does, and yet it is a decision that this major party is making. They are embracing anti-Semitism. They are embracing America's enemies. They are embracing the idea of taxing people who actually produce, who create, who build companies, who employ people. They are going after everything that capitalism and freedom has produced in this country, and they're not going to stop, which is why I think they're going to end up in the wilderness for a very long time, and deservedly so. I'm Ben Dominich. You're listening to The Big Ben Show. Email us at bigben@fox.com. Happy to welcome another Ben, Behnam Ben Taleblu, who is the Senior Director of the Iran Program at the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies. You can follow him on Twitter at TheRealBehnamBT. Thanks so much for taking the time to join me today. I want to ask you a number of questions about this operation that just played out in front of our eyes and the eyes of the world. Tell me a little bit about your immediate reaction to seeing what the United States decided to do when it came to Iran.
Well, it's really great to be with you. I basically have been watching this issue for a little over 2 decades, and multiple American presidents had been saying all options are on the table or some variation of that formulation. And multiple American presidents had been saying the Islamic Republic of Iran can't get a nuclear weapon. But I only saw one really pull the trigger, and pull the trigger in a public way when the public doubted him so much about this, when there seemed to be so much beef or tension between America and its most important partner and ally in the Middle East, Israel. And then it turned out there was a fake, a head bob, roll like a butterfly, sting like a bee kind of operation, where you had the Israelis pave the way for America to almost casually enter Iranian airspace with B-2 bombers in a kind of distraction diversion operation and drop massive ordnance penetrators, the heaviest conventional bunker buster bombs, on 3 nuclear facilities, including the crown jewel of the Islamic Republic's atomic enterprise, the Fordo Fuel Enrichment Plant, which is about 300 feet underground.
There's obviously been a response to this from American media, including the New York Times, NBC, CNN, expressing skepticism about the effectiveness of this operation. Skepticism that the president himself was disputing today as we were recording in front of NATO. I wonder what your own take is on the potential accuracy or inaccuracy of the way that this operation is being judged from afar. Because it seems to me that we really don't know a lot about what it achieved one way or the other in terms of the kind of look that we would need to understand how far back the Iranian program was set.
I think, listen, this was never going to be a one-off deal or a one-shot operation, even though I think the president's idea or inclination to use force is very much framed by the desire for it to be short, for it to be sharp, and for it to be effective. And when you look at the operation against these facilities, it really is all of those 3 things. The challenge, of course, is not just the capability for the Iranians, is that they have a will to build back better. But if the U.S. and the Israelis use and signal resolve time and time again to say to the Iranians, it'll be costlier for you to do that, then you can really begin to shape national security decision-making in Iran to your benefit. And I got to tell you, the key word in your question was from afar. And on my way in here today, I was still catching up on the news, particularly Axios had a very interesting take on how there is a difference between U.S. intel and Israeli intel on this. And not to get too in the weeds, but the Americans allegedly relied a lot in the initial battle damage assessment on signals intelligence, allegedly what you're hearing in intercepts and people are saying to each other. The way the Axios report analyzed the American use or overuse as a crutch on signals intelligence was basically that they forgot that Iran was an authoritarian Islamist country where poor military commanders lie up the chain of command, and they say, "Oh, actually, we're still doing quite well." And what may have
everything's good. Don't kill me.
Exactly. what may have been a conversation between commanders to their elites to save their skin ended up getting intercepted, and rather than dupe the big guy, the Ayatollah who's actually in a bunker, it may have duped us. And I think that's an own goal of strategic proportions, because everything that has been said about the DIA report, and I admit I haven't seen it, is now being copy-pasted into Persian to basically say, we withstood America's heaviest bunker buster bomb.
I know that this is an operation that obviously had a lot of public debate, but also behind-the-scenes debate about the best way to go about doing this. And there was some question. Our own Lucas Tomlinson here at Fox was talking to me about this last week, about whether it would actually be more effective to adopt the Israeli approach to ending, to going in basically in man and ending these outlets in ways that they could report back about potentially, or that they could have, perhaps more confidence. The decision to go in with these bunker buster bombs is one, though, that had always been kind of this is the better solution. This is if this is going to be done, we can have, enormous firepower being launched against these facilities. Do you think that that was the right choice in retrospect, given that what comes along with it is this perhaps uncertainty?
No doubt there's uncertainty. I think if you had the raid, whether it's like an Israeli commando raid or an American commando raid, the real concern would have been loss of life for us. And, again, looking at Iranian history, that's what President Carter tried to do. It was a botched operation to get the hostages out. It looked horrible for America. It was a real setback. It's not to say that we can't do commando raids. And perhaps even from a counterproliferation perspective, someone like me would have wanted to see those canisters of uranium coming out rather than us having to guess now has something been squirreled away. But this was an important test for this massive ordnance penetrator bomb, because this was the first battlefield use of it. And this was the first use of the B-2 against Iranian territory in this way. And again, it was totally consistent with the president's view of the use of military force in this pretty troubled region. So if you add it up like a cocktail, you get a whole host of ingredients that say win-win-win at little to no cost.
Are you surprised, given the makeup of this administration and the variety of foreign policy views that are within it, that this was the ultimate decision that Donald Trump made? Just given the fact that a lot of people on the outside were making the argument that if he does this, it will be a break with the MAGA movement, the America First movement, however you want to describe it, just a portion of his own support. If you believe the polls, it's something like 1 out of 5 or 1 out of 6 of his supporters that had, a dubious reaction to doing something like this. Are you surprised that he ultimately pulled the trigger, given that fact?
Honestly, no, because the president is very much the heir of two competing strands of, foreign policy thought in 20th century America that are manifest in his tendencies, in his rhetoric, and in everything that he's done. You have sort of this more internal, domestic, isolationist wing, and you have this more external-looking internationalist wing. And some can say this is Nixonianism versus Reaganism or anything else. We can put any label to it. But President Trump straddles both. He doesn't just pick one over the other. And based on the threat, based on the target, he can adopt like a 60-40 or a 70-30. So I think he made the right move here. But I also think, most importantly, we have to keep our eyes on the prize, which is, if you do care about the president, if you do care about U.S. national security, this was a limited use of force against the crown jewel of a regime that has quite literally been trying to kill President Trump for his term one successes against them. And if you cared about him, regardless of your orientation, regardless of your party, this should have been a welcome move.
Has this achieved a reset in the Middle East going forward?
I want to be very cautious here, because this is a region where things can always get worse, not better. There is room for optimism on a whole host of other fronts, but on the front of things going boom, we have vindication of a stereotype, which is we always knew that if America entered, it could do massive damage. We always knew that if there was going to be a war that moves out of the shadows between Israel and Iran, that we would see the differences between a Tier 1 military and a Tier 3 military. But the challenge of the Middle East is always, how do you translate a military win into a political win? The Israelis have had that challenge. We've had that challenge. The Iranians have even had that challenge. So we're not out of the woodwork yet, but we're beginning to align the ducks. We're beginning to align the pieces where if you build off of this, and it was just recently announced that the president is going to be seeking talks with Iranians as soon as next week, you could get back to what the president campaigned about in term one, which is I buy bad deals, I make them good deals. He distinguished himself from a big part of the Republican Party back then, saying that he would like a peaceful resolution to the Iranian nuclear program. And now he's proven that you can use military means in a limited way to try to get that peaceful end.
What is the lesson for other nations about the way that Israel approached this situation? Namely, they essentially seemed to, they created a ramp for us. They cleared the path for America to do something they wanted us to do, and that, you know, as a policy aim, you know, clearly achieved something that, as you've said, it was a bipartisan goal to the extent that it was publicly expressed. You know, what does that mean for Taiwan? What does that mean for South Korea?
I mean, I think it means that if you work with an ally, if you work by, with, and through an ally, you can actually delay American entry into a conflict, which unfortunately, because of the nature of our adversaries, all of which are authoritarian, all of which are ideological, all of which are revisionist, all of which are trying to upend a balance of power in their respective regions supported by America, if you're trying to delay American involvement in that, if you're trying to push away from the military option, it behooves you to help your allies earlier so that they can do the heavy lifting for you. It doesn't mean that America, for instance, didn't pay a huge price in World War I or World War II. But when you look at it, we entered late, but we entered decisively. And the Israelis have been the way in which you could say we have worked by, with, and through. You know, those were American planes taking out those military and nuclear targets for about a week and a half, 2 weeks, before another American plane was launched from the homeland towards these sites.
Well, it seems to me that, I think you're right, obviously, but it seems to me that one of the big lessons, the big takeaways from this is America is no longer going to be, at least, you know, as long as you have this current, you know, political leadership of the right, it's no longer going to be in the business of sending 250,000 troops to sit in a place and be a target and to manage a country or to engage in this kind of nation building. But what we are willing to do is to come in over the top and, you know, use the projection of force the ways that we alone are capable of, really, in the world, to end these types of things. To me, that's a very positive development, because it means that America is still willing to do that kind of thing, but that we also have sort of set parameters. We saw earlier today, you know, the president talking about the parameters as he sees it for NATO, and the expectation that you'll have these 5% levels in terms of their military spending. Do you view that as being holistically a new a level of attitude toward foreign policy that is going to endure beyond Donald Trump? Just given that he obviously has introduced it, but so much of the questions around him are, when he departs the stage in 3 years, you know, what happens next?
You know, you mentioned something that made me think about the chasm, and I've been living and working in D.C. for a while now, working just on this one issue. There is a chasm between the nation and the capital. It's not an imperial capital, but there is a chasm as to what matters, what's worth spending money on, what's worth fighting, killing, and dying over. And I got to tell you, the win that President Trump got with the 5% at NATO is not just a win for President Trump. It's a win for every American who's a taxpayer. It's judicious use of our money driving judicious use of allied money. It's about time that our allies stepped up, whether you call that on the left, multilateralism, or on the right, burden sharing. This is a win for that. And if you translate that philosophy to other parts of the world, if you translate that philosophy to other threats, maybe we won't have such a rancorous left-right foreign policy debate. Maybe actually we can say, well, what's in the American national interest? What is it that we and only we can do? And then once we figure that out all together, then we can be the best, sometimes privately, sometimes publicly, pushing our allies to do their part. So I think the NATO example is a very good example, and I hope it's shared in other areas.
What is one thing that Americans should understand about the Iranian government that they perhaps do not?
You know, there's no doubt Americans have seen all sorts of images about the government of the Islamic Republic. There's no doubt it's the world's foremost state sponsor of terrorism. There's no doubt they birthed their enmity with us over 46 years ago through an act of international hostage-taking. But the most important thing I think Americans should know is that the Iranian government is not representative of the American people. there's a line I love from Henry Kissinger that says foreign policy is not missionary work. And I know that as Americans, we do like to align our head and our heart, but sometimes we over-align, and then sometimes we learn the lessons of over-aligning, and then we push away, and we become amoral, or sometimes, God forbid, immoral in how we look at the world. The big difference with Iran is that, ironically, of all of the mistakes America has made in the post-9/11 Middle East, regime change is something not negative when it comes to Iran. Regime change is something that builds on that alliance of your head and your heart. So to know that the Iranian government is not at all representative of the views, values, and interests of the Iranian people, and that if you do want a more stable order in the Middle East, if you do want more integration, more trade deals, more business, the only way you can get that is if you flip the script on the Ayatollahs. Once you get a stable order in the Persian Gulf, in the Middle East, then and only then can we pivot to deal with the big picture 21st century threats like Russia and China.
What happens after Khamenei dies?
That's the million-dollar question. If you asked me 15 years ago, I would say that it's not a one-bullet state, but there has been, at the same time, such centralization and such institutionalization in Iran that he is Iran's most powerful person. Supreme leader is a title meant to be taken rather literally. He's built up support within this ideological military that's about 190,000 strong, that has lots of veterans in Iranian economy, politics, and that's the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. Many have talked about some kind of a soft military coup, but the real story is that Khamenei has already made the military coup happen. The Guard Corps are the most important institution in the Islamic Republic today. It's not the mosque, it's not the clergy. It's actually this military establishment is already calling the shots. So we've seen the video already. And because it's entirely possible that things get worse, not better, you could have a more militant Islamic Republic. But conversely, you've seen multiple rounds of anti-regime street protests in that country, particularly from 2017 to present. No surprise, it correlates with Trump term 1, maximum pressure, all of these other successes. I always like to say to listeners and viewers that the most seen tweet in the history of Persian Twitter is President Trump talking to Iranian protesters. That is historic. And aligning that here, I think there's only one real change that'll benefit all of us, which is until you get a government that reflects the views, values, and interests of those Iranian people, we're going to struggle with whatever comes after Khamenei. We're going to struggle if it's more military. We're going to struggle if it's another placeholder, old man, clerical figure. Until you get those people at the helm representing their own interests and values, we're going to struggle with what comes out of Tehran.
How much is the regime able to lie to its people about the status of things in terms of their awareness of the reality of what's going on?
The regime has tried quite a bit to control the narrative. In fact, during this whole 12-day military ordeal that they had with the Americans and the Israelis and everything else, the alarm bell I kept ringing for the public was the regime knows it's outgunned. They know it's outgunned against America. They know it's outgunned against Israel, but they're trying to win the narrative war because they're trying to project status and strength in front of their own population when everything that they've taken away from their own population, wealth and prosperity and oil wealth in particular, has been sacrificed on the altar of these missiles and drones and the nuclear program that have all gone up in smoke due to Israeli and American success. So if you live in Iran, you are not alien to the fact that this is an incompetent ideological government that is responsible for your poor lot in life. The government still doesn't care about that and is just hoping that quantity has a quality of its own. They're just hoping that just through sheer message penetration, they can, if not brainwash you, they can dishearten you. And they're hoping to dishearten the next generation of Iranian protesters.
If you have to project a year from now, are we back at the same kind of status? Meaning, if perhaps they squirreled away some of their resources, let's say it's a mixed bag in terms of where things are. Are we back at the same kind of problem, or is it a situation where this strike and its effectiveness has fundamentally changed the game when it comes to our relationship potentially with Iran?
I think it's fundamentally changed the game, but it's hard to say in which direction it's fundamentally changed the game. This could expedite some of the most dangerous things that we're seeing out of this regime, make them really make one final play, or this could expedite, its fall, its transformation, its evolution, its devolution, or there could be forces on both sides. I'm not talking the leaders, I'm talking mid-level bureaucrats who their goal could be to have us stay right here in 1 year's time, meaning just to muddle through, have some sanctions, have some strikes, have some talks, and just hope through this limp along, go along to get along approach, neither Uncle Sam nor the Ayatollah wins, and we can all just kind of pay to play and kick the can down the road.
You can follow Behnam on Twitter at @TheRealBehnamBT. He is the Senior Director of the Iran program at FDD. Thank you so much for taking the time to join me on The Big Ben Show today.
Thank you. It's a pleasure.
We are happy to be joined again by recurring guest Aishah Hasnie. Thank you so much for taking the time to join me today.
Wow, officially a recurring guest. Thank you.
I have to say, I am sorry about your Indiana Pacers.
Thank you. That felt really heartfelt and meaningful, so thank you. I will take it.
Well, it is heartfelt and meaningful because I had bet on them to win. So Dave Portnoy tweeted out that parlay didn't last very long.
You didn't try to get out of your bet, Ben, once Halliburton went down?
I was not able to cash out.
No, I'm sorry.
Oh, well.
Tragic loss.
Tragic loss. How do you feel about next season? And let me ask you this. Yeah. In retrospect, do you wish that they had actually lost Game 6 so that injury had not happened?
No, and I don't think that Tyrese Halliburton would say that either. I think that, forcing a Game 7 proved to the entire country that they belong there. And I think there were so many things that they did that proved to the entire fan base that they belong there. I think that this was incredible for the city of Indianapolis, for the Pacers organization. I think for basketball, any real basketball fan that truly cares about the game and isn't just caught up in the we got to do this in the big city. We're Knicks fans or Los Angeles Lakers fans. So I think this was really great for the organization. I think he is a hero in that city. It doesn't matter if they won or lost. They go home heroes, and people always say there's winners and losers, but I think we came out winners as well.
Mm-hmm. How cool is Sophie Cunningham?
People keep asking me about this. She's I guess now the enforcer, right?
I think she's the coolest. I think that's so awesome. I mean, it's like imagine a blonde Charles Oakley. It's just like, it's great.
I guess every team needs one. Caitlin definitely needed one. Long time coming. But look, I think the WNBA realized that they made a mistake during that game against the Sun, and perhaps somebody should have been ejected. I think there's a lot of pressure on them because it's really hard to watch these games. And I said the other day, I don't know if I'm watching the WWE or WNBA, what's going on. And I think that people are getting really sick of it. And the whole point is to get people into the stadium and fill those seats and get more viewers to watch, and they are watching for Caitlin. And you don't want to just single out one player and just only protect one, but I think that you need to set an example and make it very clear to the other teams. And the Fever need to do more and step up and have these conversations with the league.
There's more kayfabe in the WWE than there is in the WNBA. This is real, eye-gouging and So, I do want to ask you some serious questions. So now that we've moved away from the most important things, the ramifications on Capitol Hill for the decision that Donald Trump made as regards the pulling the trigger on Iran. Obviously, there's a faction of people who are on Capitol Hill, including Marjorie Taylor Greene, Thomas Massie, and the others, who have gotten under the president's skin a bit in terms of saying that he has betrayed America first or betrayed that kind of movement. How significant is that really? Is it just a handful of people?
It's not that significant, Ben. It is a small minority of folks that are going to say this about any president, no matter who it is in office. And I say that with the caveat that they still support the president. They are still huge supporters of him and will follow him really wherever he leads. But I think what we should look to is how the Democrats are reacting. And that's been very telling and interesting because you expect the opposition party to hit back and hit back hard. And there has been a lot of criticism from leadership. However, just look to what happened yesterday. There was an impeachment vote and it was tabled. It was essentially blocked, not just because Republicans voted to, table it, but because more than 100 Democrats, House Democrats, came forward and joined Republicans, including the leader of their conference, Hakeem Jeffries, to basically say, look, we have no appetite for an impeachment. He didn't commit a crime. We can ask questions. We can be critical of these decisions, whether or not he had the authority without Congress, but we're not going to pursue the impeachment game. And I think that tells you a lot. And there have been Democrats on these Intel committees that have come out and said, we support what he did. We needed to do this, and he acted appropriately. So these conversations will go on. I think we'll see a vote on a war powers resolution in the Senate, but I don't think that this criticism is really going to go far.
You mentioned Hakeem Jeffries. Obviously, Hakeem Jeffries and Chuck Schumer leading their party, on Capitol Hill. They have to look at what's going on in New York City, where Zohran Mamdani took the Democratic nomination, and I have to think that they feel concerned about the degree to which these Democratic socialists are prevailing in the current moment. Do you expect them to address that situation? Are they just going to line up behind Mamdani? What do you think is going to happen there?
We've tried to get them to comment on this, and they're being extremely careful about their wording. Hakeem Jeffries, before the election began, would not say what he thought was going to happen or who he might endorse. He wanted to completely stay out of it. And by the way, both of them are from New York. So they have a lot invested in this too, not just because of the Democratic Party. And then Chuck Schumer won't say who he voted for. He just put out a tweet finally about the Mamdani win, and just again treaded that line very carefully and said that he ran an impressive campaign and has already connected with him by phone. I think there's two things going on here, and I know there's a lot of panic and outrage, and we've already seen Elise Stefanik try to fundraise off of this win last night. I think there's two things going on in this. New York City.
Can I just interject? That was a pretty fire statement from Elise Stefanik.
Yeah. Well, because there's a political aspect to this too, right? So, number one, if a socialist wins, right, which I'm not convinced that he's going to, but if a socialist wins, it actually opens the door for a Republican in the state gubernatorial race. Like if Elise Stefanik finally decides to get in, then this makes a pretty good case for her. So she's already fundraising off of this. I think two things going on here. Number one, New York has always been sort of a laboratory for the Democratic Party. They often push to the left, and then they have to course correct. We saw that with Bill de Blasio most recently. I was living in New York City during that time, during COVID, and I had lots of friends that were liberal and always voted Democrat that suddenly swung to center right because of what happened during the pandemic. So I think that New York City voters ideologically really like those far left policies, but when push comes to shove and reality hits, they just want a better quality of life. So I'm not convinced that he wins the general election. I think it depends on what happens with Cuomo and the current mayor. Number two, I think it's a huge signal to somebody like Chuck Schumer that he's in trouble, right? I think that this opens a door to a real primary challenge if AOC certainly decides to step in. I think she's proven that she is a great, fantastic fundraiser nationwide, and now she's proven that she could potentially be a kingmaker in the Democratic Party. She endorsed this guy, and like you said earlier, maybe she's kicking herself that she didn't run, but she certainly has influence in elections when it comes to New York City. So I think if I'm Chuck Schumer, I'm being very cautious about how I approach this, because you don't want to tick off all these people now that voted for this socialist, but at the same time, you also understand that, you represent an entire state electorate. So it's going to be a very interesting next couple of months, next year and a half, watching Chuck Schumer.
Let's talk for a moment about this, the big, beautiful bill and everything that's been going on with it. Obviously, they've been trying to rush to get this done by July 4th. And there's been a number of hiccups and distractions and problems along the way for Republicans. What do you think the situation is now? And do you think that they're doing a good job of selling it to the American people? Because it doesn't really feel like that to me.
Yeah, the polls don't really show that they are. I think number one, it has to get done for Republicans if they want to keep control of Congress, or at least, the Senate and the House. I think that they have to get this done because these tax cuts are baked in. It's the biggest part. It's the headline of this bill. The rest of it can always be pieced out, including the debt ceiling, which is a big problem for some of these Senate conservatives, but the tax portion has to get done. And I think at the end of the day, it comes down to President Trump, as it always does, right? I mean, he's proven to be not only the closer, but he can also get into the nitty-gritty, the policy conversations, and he showed that he did that when he came to the House before the House was set to vote on their version. And he got into this conference meeting with all House Republicans, and everybody had problems with SALT, and everybody had problems with Medicaid, and there were all these weedy things. And he said, look, at the end of the day, like, you've negotiated as much as you can, and I'm telling you right now that there's nothing left to negotiate. Now it's time to vote. And he's potentially going to have to do that with Senate Republicans as well, because there are still a lot of fights over this. It's not ready for a vote yet. But it is going to have to come down to him. I think it will get done. I think there's a lot of questions on the Hill, even among staffers, about whether this gets done before the July 4th holiday. A holiday is always a good motivator for lawmakers, but I think it has to.
Everybody wants to get out of town.
Yeah, everybody does. Everybody does. But they're not going anywhere, according to Leader Thune, until they do get this done.
I want to ask you, having experienced, obviously, the transition that happened to Leader Thune and to Speaker Johnson finally having the responsibility of leading a majority under a Republican president. What's your assessment of them, essentially 6 months in, under President Trump in his second term, about how they've been able to work with him and the differences perhaps in how they've approached that?
I think that these two Republican leaders deserve a lot of credit, whether you like Republicans or not, because it is not easy to lead conferences that don't just fall in line. There are always conservatives that have a problem with this or that and are very vocal about it, and there are different factions with different competing ideologies, and especially in the House we see that over and over again. And for Speaker Johnson to have found a way to navigate that, I think he deserves a lot of credit. Now obviously he's leaning hard on President Trump. There are many, many votes that could not have happened without the help of those Trump phone calls last minute, because I've been there in the chamber where they're still whipping on the House floor, and people are fighting, and people are getting called into the back hallway to take a phone call from President Trump as the vote is open on the floor. So I think that he leans hard on him. John Thune is a very interesting character because everybody tries to compare him to Mitch McConnell, and we're sort of seeing this new way of leading. Mitch McConnell always was criticized for leaving his Republican conference out of the decision making. He would make a plan and then he would sort of tell everyone about it and how they were going to vote. And John Thune is taking a very different approach here, and he's trying to have those conversations one-on-one with all the different factions of his conference. But he also knows that it's a numbers game. It's always a numbers game, and because it's reconciliation, you only need 51, and he's laser focused on those 51. I think he's very well aware he's going to lose a handful, and he can only lose a handful. I think he knows he's going to no matter what, and he seems to be okay with that. His job and the future of his job depends on getting this done, and they have to do it before the summer break, because then you've got the debt ceiling crisis coming up that they have to deal with, and this is baked into that.
Last question for you, Aishah. What's your favorite piece of gossip on Capitol Hill at the moment?
Oh my God, there's so much, but I don't know if any of it's true. I don't know.
That's okay. This could be a speculative moment. This is going to be a recurring question for you on this show. So go ahead. What? Come on, give me the gossip.
No, some of this is such trash. Like I really don't. Capitol Hill is so weird. It's so funny to me because it's like high school. People always come here. I run into tourists all the time, and they're like, Aishah, how's everything going? And they ask me all these questions, and they're like, what is it really like? And I compare it to high school. I mean, it's like everyone has, trash and things to talk about on everybody, and you never know what's really true. Did you see what she was wearing? Well, there's that. There's definitely, I definitely have a lot to say on that. But I think that you just have to realize that, it's politics and everyone's got a motive for what they say and do publicly and privately. So a lot of political operators here. So you just kind of, observe and don't get caught up in it. But we'll talk after about all the rumors.
Okay. Aishah, Hasnie, thank you so much for taking the time to join the Big Ben show.